Welcome to another Black History Month tribute. Take a journey with me back to 1896 to my hometown of Miami, Florida. Let me introduce you to the early players. First, we have Julia Tuttle from Ohio. She purchased a piece of property here and moved to South Florida in 1891. Next, we have Henry Flagler, also from Ohio. He was part of the original Standard Oil, which is now ExxonMobil, BP, and Chevron. At the time, he lived in St. Augustine, Florida. Lastly, we have William Brickell, who moved to South Florida in 1871 from, you guessed it, Ohio. And he purchased a large tract of land from Coconut Grove to Miami River. This was right after our country suffered through two horrific winters called the Great Freeze. The entire nation was frozen and ruined crops all over the nation except for Miami. So this lady went up to St. Augustine, Florida with orange and citrus blossoms to show this guy that crops survived in this region of South Florida. Then she convinced this guy to extend his railroad to the southeast region of Florida for people looking to take the passage and escape the harsh winters. So this guy took his large tract of land, and this guy brought his oil money, and they began to develop Miami. And this is where we come in. There are about 400 Bahamians already settled in the Coconut Grove area. They were actually brought over to build and staff the first hotel in Miami, which was called the Peacock Inn, which opened in 1882. In 1896, Miami became a city. City planners and developers needed laborers to help build the city of Miami. So they used the nearby Caribbean islands of Jamaica, Haiti, Trinidad, and Barbados, but mainly Bahamas as their stealing and recruiting ground. Once here, these laborers were forced to live in the middle of the city, which they called Colored Town, which is now Overtown near downtown Miami. Let's fast forward 40 years to 1935. With the influx of the Caribbean immigrants, the population for the blacks in Miami had grown to 25,000. Most of these resided in the area which was now called the slums. In these so-called slums lived the city's laborers, janitors, porters, chauffeurs, truck drivers, City of Miami sewer and sanitation workers, maids, cooks, and dressmakers. The housing conditions of these homes owned by the whites and rented by the blacks barely had running water coming in, no sewage going out, and absolutely no electricity. Meanwhile, the rest of the city was lit, literally, since the city of Miami had electricity since 1904. And here comes the project. The so-called slum was located underneath, which is now a Midtown Highway Exchange. As the population grew full of newcomers seeking year-round farming, opportunity, and sunshine, so that the need to expand the city boundaries. The area in question was in the northwest section of town, which previously was far enough from the Brickells, Tuttles, and the Flaglers Investment, Ventures, and Business District. However, now they needed this land. The city proposed to build new structures with adequate housing and utilities for the black laborers. To get the votes, the city convinced the white voters that by building these structures, it would eliminate the spread of tuberculosis brought into the white homes by black workers. Many white slumlords were opposed to this project because they would lose their rental income brought in by the black workers, and no one else would rent these shacks. Nonetheless, what started as a private venture turned into one of the first public housing projects in the United States, and the very first government-subsidized public housing complex in Florida. In 1937, the Liberty Square Project was born. 243 single-family units were available for use by black families. This project is located outside of what was then the city limit. Then they built a 6-foot wall here at the same time. Just east of the 6-foot wall were the not-so-rich, working-class white folks who were left nothing but their homes after hurricanes, depression, and the bank crisis. Originally, when these projects were born, very few black folks were able to purchase homes, and if they did, they were limited to this area and this area. There were little to no police or government presence in any area outside of the city. More of these projects followed, with the Scott Project in 1953 and the Brownsville Project shortly after. Remember that because it was government housing, there was an income restriction, which many times meant only one income or several low earners in a household. Early residents were hard-working married couples, and 0 were unemployed. Many of the original couples left because they purchased a home or their income levels got too high. The average stay from 1937 to 1964 was 12 years, over doubled to 28 years in 2020, and the unemployed resident rose to 87%. By 1964, the Civil Rights Act was just passed and the Vietnam War was just getting started. And due to lack of government maintenance, the Liberty Square project was in deplorable condition. By this time, blacks were now allowed to purchase property anywhere their dollars can afford them. So many of them purchased in the outskirts of Liberty Square, and that began the white flight. Many whites began to sell their homes. This also drained a vast majority of the working class looking for home ownership out of Liberty Square. These were our teachers, lawyers, and government workers. In fact, there was an article in the Miami Herald that read, "Dade County Negroes are spreading, and they are moving rapidly, especially in the Northwest section. They're moving at a pace of a block and a half a week." Imagine. This left many units in the government complexes empty and vacant. But just as the Vietnam War injured began to come home, addicted to opioids, pain meds, and suffering from what we now know as PTSD, the government provided them with housing mixed in with our now one-parent households and children as the growth of the city grew with more immigrant dream seekers and speculatives looking for ways to solve or monopolize on the city's growth. But the tension inside of Liberty Square and its surrounding areas increased with the amount of drugs, rapes, and death within their small area. Although there was a riot in 1968 where blacks showed their frustration for disgraced housing conditions, lack of jobs for blacks, poor police and community relations, and economic competition with the Cubans, which didn't get the city's attention until the 1980 riots when a 33-year-old black insurance man and U.S. Marine Corps Corporal Arthur McDuffie was murdered by 4 police officers who beat him to death during a traffic stop. All of the 4 white cops were found not guilty. The black community was outraged and they destroyed many white businesses to the tune of $100 million, which is about $3.8 billion today. Others were forced out by not knowing the value of home ownership and knowing the power that owning land brings. Let us never forget.